welcome to Sage Mountain Center. My name is Chris Borton. I'm director and co-founder with my partner Linda Welsh here. And we started this place 26 years ago when we were kids.
We were 6.
This is only an hour tour, so I could fill up an entire week of stories things that have happened the last 20 plus years. But I thought today we'll touch on just kind of the basics of what we're doing. One of the things that I mentioned is as far as wanting to create an education center. For those of you who have property or who love the idea of maybe doing something on your own or joining a group, in my mind, one of the most important components is to become familiar with your space, your sense of place, your location. We always hear about the benefits of living and thinking locally, and in sustainable living, that's one of the key components. And so my background is I come from 3 generations of building contractors, but I hadn't done anything with construction, well, definitely alternative construction at all. But my education is primarily in music and philosophy, religion. And so when we started this project, I kind of drew on the building component gene and had to awaken this sustainability component, which was foreign. And this was, back in the late 80s. And so that was before they had internet, and they had something called libraries. And so we spent a lot of time reading books and studying and tearing out pages from magazines and just accumulating ideas of things that had already been done. So from a sustainability standpoint and the sense of place here, it was really just a matter of putting all these ideas together and customizing it to this location. So you will not be able to replicate what we've done here. It's literally impossible. You can replicate some of the basic principles that we've done and the technologies and things like that, but it'll all depend on where you live and your place. And so that kind of forms one of the basic premises of us starting and designing in this fashion here.
One example of that, one concrete example of that is when we first came here, and we're from Northern California. Our hometown is in the process of burning up right now, Santa Rosa. When we got here, we'd never lived in this kind of ecosystem. And we looked around at the animals that live here, and we noticed that the animals that don't migrate, aside from the deer and elk, live underground. So we started exploring construction systems that involved earth building. And we had, at the time, no money, but we had a chainsaw and a skill saw and a drill. We did not have cranes. We did not have the ability to move really heavy logs or anything. So cordwood masonry really appealed to us, but we also didn't have engineering background. So the cordwood and strawbale construction that you'll see was our way to fashion a building technique that was in a human scale, something that I could pick up my end and Chris could pick up his end, and that kind of mimicked an earth dwelling, in that the dwellings are very dense, a lot of thermal mass, high R value, are being resistant to heat and cold, so R25 or R40 in the case of straw. And so the construction method that kind of we feel rose out of studying and observing this place and observing the species who live here was strawbale construction and cordwood masonry. Is that working?
Yeah, that works, right? Another kind of guiding principle in our lifestyle and move towards sustainability is we've been vegetarians for, I guess it's been most of our life now, vegetarian vegans. And one of the first things we did when we moved here was to just put together some little gardens. Everybody said you can't grow anything here at this elevation. We're at 6,300 feet. And we're like, well, I'm looking around, I see a lot of growth here, so I'm sure there's something can grow here. And so we did some little test gardens, and we could grow quite a bit. And so when it came time to build, we realized that there's no way the two of us could do construction at the same time and garden. So the food production component went by the wayside. Well, fast forward 15 years or so, and we finally got around to creating our gardens, our dream gardens that we've wanted to do. And so we'll go up in a moment and take a look at our gardens. Of course, everything is kind of starting to close down now, as most of you know. But it was really nice to get back into the food production component and bringing that into our sustainable lifestyle. As Linda will share with you, Linda and Warren pretty much handle most of the garden up there. They know a lot more than I do about it. I like to eat it, of course. But so my main role here is, of course, as an educator, the consultant and builder and designer and so forth, things like that. So let's see, what else should we talk about before we go out?
I did just want to mention, you know, as you go along in life, you come up with a few salient guiding ideas, and I'm sure you're all familiar with Janine Benyes because she is from Missoula. And one of the things, a story I always like to tell, when Christopher and I got here, we decided that we wanted to get rid of the sage, and we don't really remember why we thought that that was an important thing. But we went to the county extension, and they said, well, you can burn it, or you can poison it, or you can trample it, because that's it's susceptible to that, and then you can pull it. So Chris got an old box spring mattress from the dump, and he hauled it up here. And in those days, we usually brought more from the dump than what we deposited there. Mm-hmm. And he connected the box spring to the back of the truck, and then he connected me to the box spring. And then he drove around and around, and every so often I'd go flying off, you know, with the centrifugal force. But anyway, then we pulled the sage, and in the spring we noticed this extremely dense, beautiful sage coming up all over where we had done our worst. So I think one of the principles after that, I like to say, Sage Mountain Center was born, you know, and we realized that we're surrounded by 3.8 billion years of intelligence, as Janine Benyes says. And so if we quell our youthful vigor, you know, and get a little bit more quiet and observe and do. Christopher's super great at trial and error, so everything we did, we practiced first on a small scale, and we had a 4-stage plan. It was supposed to take us 10 years. It took us about 20, but we would do phase 1 and take a lot of notes, and then whatever worked from that we would implement in phase 2. So by the time we got to the main house, nothing was new. Christopher had already figured out all the systems, and so we knew what we were doing by then. But my point is, I love Janine Benyes' phrase about relating to nature as mentor, as model, and as measure, because it's easy when you're transplanted in a place to like, I spent many years thinking, like, is it okay that I'm here? I'm not from here. I wasn't born here. Do I have a right to be here? And I met this beautiful man who said, Linda, he totally refused to tell me where he was born and like about his background. He was like, we are all indigenous. We're all indigenous to this planet. We all belong here. And I loved the idea of not only allowing myself to feel a sense of belonging and connectivity to this place, but also it's like the next step up, you know. It's like, okay, I'm Hispanic, I'm a woman, you know, but as you go up further, I'm human, I belong here, this is my world. And I love the feeling of that. It's very moving. So relating to nature as mentor, as model, and as measure, because for someone who's transplanted here, sometimes it's hard to know if you're doing the right thing. And I love the idea that sustainable living, we don't know if our actions are sustainable because our lives aren't long enough, right? Because we don't know. So I just so that I'm not totally paralyzed. I tell myself, in everything that we're doing here, does it add to life? Does it add to the fertility of the soil? Does it add to diversity? Does it add to the beauty of this place? Does it foster life? So those have been salient points for me to kind of hold, you know, looking around and knowing that I am natural, and all this intelligence that we're surrounded by also animates me. And I can interact in this place without having a negative impact. I can live here, and the result of my life can equal more fertility. And when you look, I love the lodgepole pines when they are totally saturated with beetle and they're dying. They pump out thousands of cones, thousands of seeds. So it's like their last impulse is to add to life. And so those are some of the things that I have found that have been meaningful to me in this sustainable living journey. So.
Nice. Before we head up to the garden here and start walking around a little bit, one of the things Linda and I are both is big-time planners. And usually from the seminars and stuff that we've done, I've noticed there's pretty much two types of people, those who plan and those who don't. And from a builder's perspective, it's really a challenge if you don't plan and you start building. And if you maybe have experience with that in the past, it's just really difficult because constructing a building is almost like creating a body. It's full of systems and structure and skin and shell, and you want it to be living and comfortable. And so with that in mind, we started, like Linda said, in stages. We built a little cabin out in the forest. We hid it so nobody could see it. And that's where I practiced all the basic techniques that you'll see today. Then we moved up a few years later to the guest house, and we won't visit that either because we don't have time. But we lived in the guest house over there for about 10 years. And then final stage was building the main house. I should also mention something real quick before we head up there, is we hadn't anticipated, we knew we were going to be doing classes and workshops way back when, just sharing the information, but we hadn't anticipated the interest just in this area because we really didn't know a lot of people doing this kind of stuff. And as the interest grew, one day we got a knock on the door. And up here, when someone knocks on the door, you're like, who is that? Who found us? And two people came up, and they both had, back then, it was Montana Power Company signs on their hats and stuff. And we thought, oh no, they found us. Because we've been off-grid, and we continue to be off-grid. And so it turns out they were starting a new program back in 1999 promoting green energy in Montana. And we had already been doing workshops in solar energy and solar hot water. And they asked if we would be interested in partnering with them. And it was really a weird connection in the beginning. Like first we were like, because they were speaking like legalese, corporate language. And we were like, we do not understand. Talk English, talk American. Yeah, so basically they had a whole bunch of money and they said, what can you do? We don't even know where to start. And so I said, oh, great, I can affect 300,000 customers instantly with a message of green energy. So that set in motion a partnership that's lasted right up until probably the last couple of years. So almost, 18 years or something of designing Northwestern Energy's literature, their green program, solar hot water systems, all that stuff. And the thing that blows me away if you're a Northwestern Energy customer is if you look at their literature and stuff online, it's evolved, but it all started right up in that office up there, off-grid. And it's just really fascinating, you know, kind of when you open up your world to possibilities, what falls in your lap. So something to keep in mind. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Linda, and we're going to walk up to the garden.
So this is our high altitude garden. And since we're so short on time, I'm just going to give you some broad strokes with what we've learned. This is the 8th year of gardening up here. So there's 3 main challenges at this elevation. The first is we live in a desert. Last year we got 9 inches of rain. On a good year we get 12 inches of rain. So we really want to hang on to every drop of rain that falls. When we built this garden, Christopher and I picked a location that had maximum sun exposure. And we were thinking, okay, the sun rises over there, it sets over there. We want like the longest possible day. But we built the garden on a prow, like the prow of a ship. So when rain falls, it drains off. So I'll show you how we remedied that with garden experiment number 2. We call it the forest garden up there. We started by building a swale. And we noticed that all the plants, most of them were propagated from here, grew to the same maturity level in half the time because there was more water. The second problem we have here is we have wild swings in temperature, so like 50-degree swings in temperature. So all of our annuals are put in these raised beds, and all of these raised beds that you see are covered with remay or agribon. So we're moderating those huge swings in temperature, and we're also hanging on to moisture. We have our perennial beds over there, and as you can see, those are not in a raised bed format. There's raspberries, garlic. Those are not raised up because we want the roots to be able to stay warm in winter. We have like the herb spiral that everybody has. Do not plant mint in your herb spiral because your herb spiral then becomes a mint spiral. And so this is our mint spiral. So the third thing, we have wild swings in temperature and no rainfall. And what's the third thing, Warren? Oh yeah, predation. We have huge issues with predation, and actually that is the most challenging thing. So we can moderate temperature with our raised beds and our agribon, and we can mulch heavily and hang on to all the water, but we have not figured out how to fence out the little chipmunks, the little
It's not deer, not elk. Chipmunks.
It's chipmunks. And they'll, over a course of 24 hours, will take like every single cherry off of the tree and just like leave me one. So competing with those guys is really a significant issue for us, and we're always talking about how we can figure out how to do that. So we've experimented with every cultivar that is in a zone 2 or a zone 3. We love fruit-bearing shrubs rather than fruit trees, because the fruit trees just have one trunk, whereas a shrub has multiple branches. And so we've had problems with voles, and if that one trunk gets compromised, you've lost your tree. Whereas this year we had a foot of snow very early. Nobody had lost their leaves. We were out like every 2 hours shaking everything, trying to keep everything from breaking. But we've noticed that snow loads on the trees is much more difficult to manage than, say, for a shrub. So at this elevation, fruit-bearing shrubs are really the best way to go. The one that we love the most is honeyberry. We're attracted to everything with Siberia, Moscow, and Russia in the name. And the Canadian haskap or Russian honeyberry is the most productive berry for a few reasons. It's the first out in the spring, so it actually comes to fruition before the chipmunks wake up. And the fruit is born underneath the branch, so the birds don't know that it's fruited. Is that a word? Fruited? And so that is a hugely successful plant, and it's bulletproof. It's just so frost hardy. And then elderberries have been, they're hugely productive. The berries are up high. They're so productive it doesn't matter if the birds eat a bunch of them. And so we have keyhole beds, spiral, perennial beds, lasagna beds. We tried really to create a canopy layer in this place, but our season is about 58 days if we're lucky. We had a very hard frost on June 25th this year, and then a foot of snow like 60 days later. So Yeah, we haven't been able to create a canopy layer, so we've started to build shade structures. We'll put in some more shade structures just to help with evaporation.
Something. Along those lines with the shade structure, thinking in terms of linking energy with ag, anytime we're watering, of course, we're drawing energy from our battery bank, from our solar electric system. And so anybody who's familiar with living off-grid, you know that you have a limited amount of energy, so you need to learn how to operate within your means. And so because the climate is warming up so much, what we've noticed is there's so much evaporation going on during the summer months, and it's just really difficult to keep everything watered as much as it needs. We've got, is this on? Oh, yeah. We've got basically three types of watering that we're doing here. We're doing a little hand watering around. We've got some drip irrigation and soaker hoses. If we didn't care about water and energy at all, we'd just put on a big monster sprinkler and irrigation system and just saturate the whole area. But we can't do that here. And so one of the ideas I had, I noticed how just in this little pergola situation here we have that's shaded in the summertime, it tends to be a little more moist. And so I'm toying with an idea this winter of designing shade cover for this entire garden. And just almost thinking of it as maybe how someone might grow in Arizona because of the amount of heat and the increased evaporation that we're having. And we know that anytime we shade something, that slows evaporation, which equals less watering, which equals less energy to pump the water. And so I'm kind of excited about that challenge, just to kind of see how it manifests in the planting stages this winter.
Chris is going to talk about the greenhouse, which we love. But just on the other side of this fence, we're collecting rainwater. All the buildings at Sage Mountain Center are watering something. The rain gutters of the main house are being directed into a wetlands along with our gray water. But in the forest garden here, we are directing the rain gutter water into the bottom of the swale. And also because of the swale, we're able to catch rain fall. When you go in the greenhouse, she's doing some mulching with some aspen leaves that we collected from the aspen grove and some worm compost. We did do raised beds in the greenhouse, which we wouldn't do again because we have more exposure to air all the way around our raised beds, so it's harder to keep things moist in there. So we're experimenting with some different mulches to see if we can hang on to moisture.
And a couple more things, then we'll keep moving around here. The greenhouse behind us is kind of an experiment, which I've really been happy how it's performed. It's I didn't want the idea of using fossil fuel to heat in the wintertime, and whether that's with propane or electricity. And so I was able to get some surplus evacuated solar hot water tubes, which is what you see on the south side. And so I plumbed into the floor 300 feet of PEX pipe. And so in the wintertime, that helps offset some of the coldest times a year by warming up the lower level of the greenhouse. So it's basically in-floor heating, but without an outside power source. The circulation pump comes on with the little solar electric panel there, and it's just what we call solar direct or PV direct. So there's no batteries, no grid. When the sun shines, the pump turns. When the sun sets, it stops. Beautiful symmetry between the two. The fan in the greenhouse is also solar direct. When the sun shines brighter, the fan turns faster. When the sun sets, the fan turns off. I love the simplicity of that technology. And so the greenhouse is a three-sided plastered straw bale greenhouse. The technique is modeled off of what we've used successfully on all of our buildings here. Our straw is sourced locally at Smith's Ranch down in Whitehall. I usually say we can see where our walls are grown. And so they make a real nice construction grade bale, and they don't know that, but they do. And so, so we've used their bales all these years. And then the earth plasters are plaster mix that's come from all of our topsoil, which we stored up during excavation of the site, and we've been using the topsoil for all of our earthwork, plaster work, and gardens for all these years. And as we know, topsoil is a very valuable resource. And so with that, let's just kind of walk through the garden. Greenhouse. It's in transition now. This is a 75-watt solar electric module, and what it does, it's hooked up to a little circulation pump, and when the sun shines, the pump turns on. When the sun sets, the pump turns off. So it's what we call PV direct or solar direct, and it's very simple. And we've done internships and had woofers, and we have a thriving Airbnb here as well. So these are just kind of some of the things going on.
Just wanted to just point out the swale here where we're collecting rainwater from the tea house. And if we were living off of what we could grow, we'd be eating tons of garlic and mushrooms.
Berries.
We have these beautiful blooms of oyster mushrooms that nobody eats. And speaking of the squirrels as nobody, but we also have rhubarb everywhere. There's this derelict lot in Butte that has been sharing itself with us in terms of rhubarb. So when our nieces and nephews come, we talk about theft. And the 3 things you should ask yourself before you steal something. 1, how would you feel if you look in the mirror? And 2, how would you feel if your mother knew? And 3, how would you feel if it was published in the newspaper? So if you're okay with those questions, then you can go ahead and take a shovelful of rhubarb out of the rhubarb pasture in Butte. So all the things that nobody eats, like the creeping onions and rhubarb and nettle is a wonderful stuff. Native. All that stuff is outside of the fence. And there's only about 5 things actually we can grow. Yucca does okay outside of the fence.
Yeah, actually.
Asparagus? No, even inside
Actually,
the fence.
every deer-resistant plant they will eat. Except yucca. I haven't seen them eat yucca yet.
Yeah, they never.
Have you seen that? It's like this spiny cactus thing is brutal.
Beautiful.
But no, everything they eat.
There's some great
it's
yucca
amazing.
on Highway 90 in like the Three Forks area. If you take that exit, beautiful yucca. Yeah.
Okay.
Could I say one thing?
Sure.
So I'm an engineer by training, but also a permaculture designer and lover of the land. And this is something that I think you're going to hear interwoven to workshops this weekend because of who AERO is. But I'm fascinated, and I want to make sure that everyone has heard of the concept of the carbon cycle in the soil and sequestering carbon in the soil. And I know you'll hear that interwoven in various places this weekend. But it's something that's part of what makes sense here about covering the soil, keeping the moisture in, perennial agriculture, food forest. It's letting the plants do their photosynthesis, put carbon into the roots, and trade that carbon sugar in their roots with the mycorrhizal amazing communities that are in the soil. And so I just wanted to mention that as well. It's something that's really happening here.
You bet.
That's the other
Thanks,
thing
Carol.
about mulching heavily is just trying to extend the life of the soil life. Since our season is so short, we want that soil activity to be happening for as long as possible.
Another part of the sustainable principle when you move on to a location is one of the principles is to try to develop the least desirable place and leave the natural beautiful places as they are. And so if you look at this place, there was a natural meadow where our main house was. It was just, that's how it was. It was just meant to be. That's where the house was going to be. The other thing was the garden up here. We had a nice window for solar energy, but like Linda mentioned, this is a rock granite slab that we're on. And so it was actually the least desirable place to put a garden because there was no topsoil here. And so this whole process that you see taking place over the last 8 years has been a process of developing and creating soil on top of this granite slab. And that's what we're on, this whole little kind of ridge here that we're standing on. And you can grow stuff here, and you can grow stuff when you nurture it and develop it and create something from nothing in a sense. So let's go down. You're welcome to walk through the garden a little bit, walk through the greenhouse, and then we'll make our way down to the house. So as I mentioned, we've been off-grid. That was one of our plans way early on. Back in the day, solar was super expensive. I don't know if any of you have been following the technology, but it's extremely cheap right now. And it's competing nationally with the coal and natural gas. I never thought I would be alive to see the day where solar electric would be cheaper than, or as the same cost as fossil fuel. So it's really an incredible thing. When we moved up here, we had a little solar electric system, and Linda referred to it earlier, and it's on the guest house now. It was from a recycled power plant that closed down in California in the 60s. And we paid about $100 per watt back then. So you figure the size of a 100-watt panel, let alone 1,000 watts of solar. Now you can get solar for 70 cents a watt. So it's incredible what's happening around the country and around the world. So as I mentioned earlier, when you live off-grid, you have to be comfortable with living within your means. Not your financial means, of course, but your energy means. And that means being aware of what appliances use how much energy and just what your loads are in your building. So when we designed this place, one of my goals was to have it be as energy efficient as possible with the natural materials that were available. And so we were able to get this down to, we use about 1/3 of the energy of a conventional home. Our solar electric system, you'll see it in a little bit, we'll go inside in a moment here, basically powers 7,000 square feet of living space. And you'll be blown away how small our system is. You know, a lot of us are used to seeing, you know, huge solar arrays covering vast areas, but it really just comes down to how much you use. If you build in energy efficiency first, which Dave will be talking tomorrow about a workshop about that, then you move into renewables, you've got the best of both worlds. We get our power from 2 sources here. Photovoltaics or solar electricity, which I'll be talking about tomorrow. I think my talk is at 1 o'clock, I think. And small wind generation. When you're off-grid, that's one of the things principles you want to maintain are having 2 natural power sources if possible. And it's nice because on a day like today we have lower light levels, but as you notice we have higher wind levels. And so solar and wind always go opposite of each other, which works perfectly. In the wintertime we have more wind, in the summertime we have more sun. And it's nice to be able to channel that energy into your storage system. As a backup, we have a backup generator. We've rarely used that. We actually bought it when we started having large groups here. And we would have people, 20 people here staying for a week. And everybody leaves the lights on and everybody has showers 24 hours a day, and we would watch the batteries go lower and lower and lower. Oh, and there would be no sun and no wind. And we never had a backup generator for about the first 10 years that we lived here. I really dislike fossil fuel myself. I mean, it served its purpose, and now we need to move on. That's my opinion of it. Anyway, so this is 1,000 watts of solar energy standing behind a tracker. You can see it moving slightly. It's a passive tracker. It's designed to follow the sun, but it's also designed to dump the wind loads. So that's what those shock absorbers are for. So when the wind blows real hard, it turns slowly, and then it'll return back to the sun. Right now, it's just kind of like saying, where is the sun? Right? Because the sun's over there. But it's like, where are you? but it'll find it. And then this is a 1,000 watt wind generator. Wind energy had always been cheaper than solar energy for decades. And like I said, now with the plunge in prices for photovoltaics, small wind generation is really struggling as an industry right now. Why? Because solar electricity has no moving parts, which means minimal maintenance at all. Wind generation, maintenance. It's getting time for me to climb that tower and check all the nuts and bolts. I do it every fall. I don't mind it. It's kind of cool. The view is amazing up there. And it's kind of deceptive. That's an 85-foot tower. Those blades are 10 feet in diameter. So if I put my hand here, this is how high they are going around. So when I'm up on that tower, I'm actually kind of like a little teeny person up there. But it's kind of deceptive how it looks. The reason the tower is 85 feet is because the biggest enemy to wind generation is turbulence. What we want is clean, smooth, prevailing winds. We don't have a prime wind location here because of our mountains and trees, but we do get energy, and so we use that energy to supplement our solar electricity. An ideal location would be on the open plains. You know, I always think right down in Whitehall, amazing, the wind's just constant. And there's lots of places in Montana. We rank just about number 2 in wind potential in the United States. So we have a lot of wind in Montana. So we're going to go in the house now, keep things moving on. We're going to walk through the middle of the house, the main house. As Linda mentioned, this was the last phase of our construction. I'm kind of honing, fine-tuning what worked, what didn't work with the other earlier buildings. Let me think. As we go through the house, a few things. It's easier to talk about it here. It's passive solar design, so it's oriented towards what we call true solar south. We try to maximize the solar gain in the wintertime, and we try to minimize the heat gain in the summer. And that's the beauty of a passive solar home. You'll see a lot of thermal mass in the cordwood construction. That means it retains heat and holds it in the wintertime when you want it. In the summertime, it's like being in a cave in there, which is so nice. We were just scorching, you know, this summer, all of us, and we just walk in our house and it would just be so cool, and you just want to take your feet off and walk on the floor. Let's see, we have inflow radiant heat for the heating system in the house. It's heated by solar hot water panels. You can see kind of the tops of them. Also tied into the wood stove. There's all kinds of features in this place. If you just go to our website, you can see the different elements that are in there. There's a gray water heat recovery system. So when you shower or you do the dishes, the hot wastewater, the heat is extracted off the hot wastewater before it goes out into the septic system. So you're not sending out hot wastewater out into the septic system or into the gray water system that we have. What else is in there? LED lighting throughout, high efficiency appliances. A lot of appliances, most people don't realize, but there's a huge difference between the energy consumption of different appliances, and a lot of times a real typical model tends to blow all the other fancy ones away. Sears Kenmore Elite brand, most people don't know this, but that brand makes the most efficient appliances out there right now. They're always at the top. Sears Kenmore, who would have guessed? Let's see, what else? What's that? We have composting toilets. We started in the guest house and in the first cabin just with composting toilets. But by law, you have to have a septic system in Montana. So I know there's some of you out there that don't, or you're trying to sneak by, but be careful. So anyway, we hate septic systems. We did not want a septic system. And we loved composting toilets. So, but we had to have one. So we were able to work with the inspector and the county to shrink the size of our septic system because we were building a demonstration center and everything was super high efficiency in water and energy. So we saved a couple $1,000s in the size of the septic system. But I put in a switch, our valve, and I can turn it. And that goes to gray water and that goes to septic system. So I have that option. I never turn it to gray water, but it's just there. So let's see, what else?
You want to talk about your ghost loads and your switches?
Ghost loads, yeah. Most electronic appliances in a home, stereo, computers and stuff, use electricity 24 hours a day, unless you actually unplug them out of the wall. They're just there, sleeping, so to speak, but they're actually using energy. So when you build new construction, you can actually build in switched outlets. So when we're done for the day in the office, we hit a switch and it turns off everything. And we know that it's not draining the batteries or just wasting energy. Same with the kitchen. You'll notice switches in the kitchen. We can turn off all the outlets in the kitchen when we're done cooking for the night. So little things like that. Another question that was asked a moment ago is how we finance this. And yeah, get to some real world stuff. We're not millionaires, you know, we wish. But so in the early stages, Linda has worked for the man for many years. She's an amazing nurse and had the steady income. I'm the one that's kind of flitting around and it's like, okay, let's do this, let's do that. Of course, now things have changed quite a bit, but I do a lot of consultation work and I travel all over the state. But in the early days, we would just try to build within our means. And so we would save up money, and we started looking for land way back when. And when we moved from Northern California, Santa Rosa up here, we had a friend who was just retiring there, and she loved the vision and the idea of what we were doing. And so she loaned us, was it 10,000 or 20 for starters? 13,000 to get us started, because we could not get a loan anywhere. A bank would just laugh at us, right? Off-grid strawbale construction, you know, especially 25 years ago. And so so we just started borrowing from our friends, and we would work with lawyers and contracts and everything, give them a really good interest rate and pay it off. And then we reborrowed and then paid it off. And then my mom wanted to get involved in it. So we did the same thing with her. Then Linda's mom wanted to get involved in it. So basically family and friends have become our bankers to finance this entire project. If you're working with family and loans, be sure you always work with a lawyer, okay? Everything nice and legal and clean. You know, nothing's worse. I know some of you go through this with brothers and sisters, and well, you know, you gave them $5,000. What about us? You know, it gets ugly. So keep it nice and legal. And so that's how we've been able to finance this project over the years. Yes?
How much per square foot did the various building and construction?
So how much per square foot did the buildings cost? The guest house costs $15 a square foot. Did you hear what I said? That's ridiculous. Granted, we did the labor ourselves. The main house cost $25 a square foot. It cost us $125,000 to build this house. It's 5,000 square feet. We recycled a lot of products. Linda said in the early days we would bring more stuff back home from the dump than when we went to the dump. And we used as much materials on the land as possible. Soil, rock, wood, and then again wind, sun, all that stuff to fuel it. And then of course our own labor. The only thing we really contracted out on was the initial earthwork to create the pad for the house and the floating of the slab of the entire foundation. If you've ever worked with concrete before, oh my God. And for doing, you know, 2,500 square foot floating that slab, that was the best $2,000 we ever spent. There was a crew of 5, and I'm just sitting back in a chair thinking, oh, thank God I'm not doing that, because it's such hard work. So, yes.
I don't know a tremendous amount about solar. When I looked into it a while ago, the batteries were extremely expensive, or you could sell back to the grid, and I'm wondering what it looks like now.
Thanks for bringing that up. By the way, that's what my talk will be on tomorrow, if you're going to make that, just the details. But in a nutshell, batteries are and have been the most expensive part. Well, actually, now that's true. In the early days, the solar panels were always more expensive. This is an off-grid, so there's no utility lines up here. The industry itself is booming worldwide with grid intertie, where you're tied into the power grid. Most people who are grid intertied do not have batteries. You use the power grid as your battery bank, which makes a lot of sense in some ways. But you don't have backup power. When the grid goes down, your system shuts off. That's how they work. They're designed for safety reasons. Battery technology is something I'm really excited about right now. We just got a company to donate some lithium-ion batteries. I just installed them 2 weeks ago, and I'm blown away. I'm reluctant to say I'm a total convert. I'm going slowly, but so far as I can tell, I will never be touching another lead-acid battery again. At the efficiency of these things and how fast they charge and how light they are. It's just amazing. And that's why the whole auto industry is going towards lithium-ion batteries. It's a new technology. I'm comparing right now lead-acid batteries to lithium. The comparison would be coal-fired power plants to solar. That's what it's like. So when we go in the power room, it's really small. It can only fit about 10 people in there, so you can kind of filter into that room and take a look. But you'll notice, you'll see our you'll see the lead-acid battery bank. I labeled them for you on the right, and the new lithium-ion batteries. Keep in mind that little lithium-ion battery is powering this entire facility. It's going to blow you away. A challenge when you want to be completely sustainable, it's extremely difficult. When we first moved here, I went through everything I could possibly read and think on sustainable living, and the conclusion I came to, if you wanted to be 100% sustainable, would be to look for an indentation in the ground, like some little mild spot, and just sleep there. That's it. That's where you live. And you eat there too, whatever. As soon as you do something with a shovelful, you're affecting the environment. And it was really interesting, just this intense sense of responsibility when we first moved here, and it was untouched. Not totally untouched, because as we were doing excavation, we've run into a number of arrowheads and spearheads, which blows me away. And these are like feet under the ground. You know, think of the length of time it takes to create topsoil, and you run into these things that deep. So I know we're not the first ones here, but yeah, it's an interesting compromise. Everybody has their own level of compromise. You have to find out where your level is.
And then sawdust in the middle. So you create this mortar bed, and then you place the logs widthwise in the wall. And so the log ends that you see, that chunk actually goes all the way through. And then you just continue that process. So we could build maybe 2.5, 3 feet at a time. And if you go too high up, you can see your mortar joints start to shrink a little bit from the weight. So we would just do about 2.5, 3 feet. And then the guest house, the walls, the cordwood walls are bearing the load of the roof, whereas in this house, we built a post and pole framework, so the strawbale and cordwood is just infilling. Because our weather is so wild here, with both of those techniques, you want to use materials that are dry. So it was much easier to get the roof on, and then we could just slowly do the infilling process.
So we want to thank you all for coming. It's been great having you out here. I'm sure we'll see you the rest of the day, or maybe later on, or tomorrow, and so on. We have cards you're welcome to take on the table there, just a little Sage Mountain Center card. Feel free to visit our website and get a little more detail on some of the different things. I know we just touched on this, but like I said, you know, we could easily do seminars on so many things here. But at least we got some of you, I know you've been wanting to come here for years, and it's wonderful that you made it. And so thank you all. And yeah.